Okay, well, welcome everyone to the part 3 of our series of webinars with regards to cyber issues, cyber insurance. I'm David Lang. I'm joined with John Eunice and Brent Creasy from Bit by Bit, one of the region's leading cyber forensics and information security firms that we have met through our clients. So today we're going to try to put this all together for you. Understand how cyber incidents trends are affecting the insurance marketplace and industry, the insurance's rules, and helping you with risk management when it comes to cyber. Understanding the various insurance coverages that are out there, and other things that you'll obviously need to understand relating to insurance. As I said, I am David Lang, the Chief Risk Officer for Duncan Financial Group. We are joined by Brett Creasy from Bit by Bit. He's President and Director of their Digital Forensics, and John Eunice, who is the CEO, and don't hold against him, he is an attorney. So in this case, he's the good attorney. He's for you, not the other people. So with that, gentlemen, I think we will lead into putting this all together. Let's have a quick refresher as to what we covered over the first two so that everybody understands how all these play into how the insurance policies need to respond to them.
David, on this one, I think, as we touched on before, a lot of times, these attacks are thought of as a, big business problem. People think they'll fly under the radar. But that's not the case. Small and certainly mid-sized businesses are very attractive targets to attackers. Often that's thought of because they probably don't have the resources to defend themselves as well. But if you're a business and you're making a profit, then you have something that's probably valuable for somebody else to steal, even if that is just information about your clients or customers or employees. So no one's too small or too, under the radar to get hit by attacks. A lot of them might be opportunistic. The bad guys might not be out there, researching you deliberately to try to attack you in, sophisticated ways. But they can certainly take a couple swipes at you using just, very run-of-the-mill attacks and find success. Phishing being one of the most, common ones of that. Again, stats out there, about half of the firms considered small size in terms of the, past years data breaches are seeing those sort of incidents, we'll call it. Not every incident is a breach, of course, but it is ramping up and something that everybody really needs to consider. And the last bullet here really at the top about kind of the reliance on hopefully law enforcement to help, figure everything out and go, nab the bad guy is something that, also just doesn't comport with reality, unfortunately. There's resource limitations, with government agencies as well in terms of, the types of cases and the volume really that they can keep up with. And so that's why, of course, you see a lot of private firms like ours, getting involved in, on day one while the attack is initially occurring, helping to investigate that. And certainly, depending on the attack, law enforcement might get involved and have a separate kind of investigation of their own. But it is, fortunately, for a lot of folks, not, just picking up the phone call and calling in the FBI and they're going to swoop in and kind of fix everything. A lot of the investigative and remediation work is done, by private entities.
Yeah, that's some of the statistics we're seeing on the insurance from the insurance companies is that, a vast majority seem to be from employees allowing somebody into their system. And a lot of times it's smaller employers that have access to larger employers that might be their customers or their suppliers that they go upwards. We mentioned in the first one, the Target credit card breach for Black Friday years ago started from a small HVAC contractor here in Pittsburgh. But in continuing with that, you had handed out a nice sheet of things that employers should look at things that they should do to help protect themselves. And being a degreed credential risk manager, I kind of took that and started putting into a list of how we look at the cycle of identifying and analyzing risks, how to best control them, how do we deal with risk transfer and financing of them, how do we implement programs. And yeah, I mean, it's can be kind of scary when you start going through that analysis.
Yeah, but it is, it's also manageable. One thing when people take away is that, all is not lost. There are very accessible security frameworks, I'll call it. I mentioned before, I think the one that we rely on the most is the Center for Internet Security's controls. So just groups of controls that get very kind of down to brass tacks things that companies of any size can do. It's not a one size fit all plan. You can evaluate that, with risk people, IT, kind of get all the right parties involved from a business standpoint and understand what it is that you have so that you can figure out how to protect it. And so I think in terms of that little cheat sheet that we mentioned that we put together, and I see it's listed here as well. As bullet number one is the data mapping aspect of it, right? You have to know what you have in order to protect that asset. And so it's a key piece really for any business to undertake, just having a list of, their, not just their physical assets, but, really kind of the electronic version, if you will, knowing that, some things are out at a third-party provider, some are behind their four walls, perhaps in a server room or something like that, and mobile endpoints that people have, but just really understanding where everything exists, and then taking that a step further and understanding where the critical data exists. Right, not all things are created equal, and so understanding that flow of information through your business is important because, again, how else are you going to protect it if you don't know what you have and where you have it?
Yeah, and the biggest thing we see from an insurance standpoint when we're filing claims on behalf of our clients is how many are surprised that their data was in the cloud or they had a third party that was hosting things for them, that they were on the hook because the breach originated from themselves into the third party, or even if it was the third party contract, still put that back on them.
Yeah, there's a takeaway there, I guess, that, just because you sign up with a reputable third party to manage something on your behalf, maybe it's an MSP to take care of your IT security, or, as you said, the data is being held out in the cloud. At the end of the day, if you're the entity, right, that's has the incident, you're the name that's in the news, you're the one that's going to be on the hook. And so that third party, kind of vendor risk management, if you will, is becoming an increasingly important thing to consider. You had the Target, example earlier, but we're seeing more and more of that where, clients are coming to us because of questions that perhaps insurance is asking of them or their own clients are asking of them about, how they're managing their third parties too.
Yeah, and then in part two, we talked about what happens after when you do have an event, so everybody could expect what that would occur, and so that anytime you have one, it's going to be something new, but it's good to know kind of what you're going to have to expect when it does occur.
Yep. Yeah, we see a lot of, of course, repeat themes in terms of the types of cases, right? There's just, a lot of incidents that start with email, right? They start with a phishing attack of some sort of social engineering. They get into email systems that then leads to something else, further information gathering, further access. A lot of times eventually leads to some sort of ransomware type event where ransomware is the parting gift and not, the starting gift and not the welcoming gift, I guess. Bad actors are stealing information and doing a bunch of harm, to a company. And then, the cherry on top is the ransomware. So the attacks can be multi-stage. They can be long in terms of, the dwell time or endurance of them. It's not always just, not like just a fire, right? If you've got smoke and you've got fire and you put it out, it's done. A lot of times these attacks can linger on for for months if you're not careful about, the cleanup aspect. And that's why, kind of the list on the right is, so important, just to understand, as we mentioned, I think, what the duties are, which I know you'll get into in more detail here as we go. But the forensics and figuring out what happened, a lot of folks kind of take the approach of, okay, somebody got into an email account, so I'm going to, change the password, and, my IT guy says that he doesn't see anything, so therefore we're good. Well, they know that, one of the first steps that most attackers take is to download the entire account, right? And if they do that, now you need to know, whose data is in that account, because that's going to trigger, some of these other events of breach, notifications, and, maybe even follow on litigation. And so, all those steps that need to occur, even in what we'll call the small incidents, is overlooked, I think, by a lot of folks. And, there's a lot of risk out there because of that.
Two aspects there, Brett, just to follow on with litigation readiness. We've seen really two tracks that can take. So depending on the organization, there could be customers that might sue the organization because they didn't have measures in place to protect data. There's civil liability that could follow. In addition, there could be regulatory liability. So if an individual or a company has data for customers or employees that gets breached based on where the individual resides, the data was accessed by the bad guy, the organization would then have duties to notify that individual that there may have been access to personal information. And that timeframe might vary from state to state, and does often vary, but it can be pretty quick. So I know we laugh about lawyers being the bane of all existence, but here's where they can really help you in terms of readying for that, preparing for that, and mitigating that occurrence. If it does happen, having civil litigators, on your roster to help you through that, as well as lawyers with a privacy background, is very important from our perspective. Now, last thing I wanted to say is, it sounds very labor intensive, and it can be, to identify if there are individual accounts in a database and personal information that got accessed, but there's technology available that can be leveraged actually to fairly efficiently aggregate Mr. Jones's account with his social security number, his birth date, whatever was accessed by the bad guy that's personal in nature, that can be used to package that together. Then the legal team would come in with that package and then disclose the breach notification obligations. So it's not always lost. It is stressful and fast-paced and a lot of work, but there is not just the need to have lawyers look at documents. There's technology out there that can help package it for them, help your end legal counsel, help you meet your obligations for notification.
Yeah. So it's, so ultimately that's some of the things that the insurance will come in, and just like you alluded to, one of the first accounts or businesses that we met over was a client of ours that thought they had a ransomware. Well, they had a ransomware attack, thought it was minor. Their IT firm, started cleaning things up, restoring the systems. And a couple of days later, I'm having a conversation with our client who says, "Oh, by the way, we had this. We didn't want to turn in a claim." And when he showed me the screenshot as to the ransomware attack, I said, "Well, it says they're not, expose data." And he goes, "Oh, they always do that." Well, turns out you went in, did your forensics, and determined they took like 250 gigabytes of data out of their system. And the client had, I think, 2 days left in their time frame to legally notify in the state that it occurred. So the notifications had to go out that day, where they'd never reach in time by mail and they'd be subject to additional fines and penalties from the state. So it's important to understand how this all works as we transition. And I added this this morning because I just read it, that at the end of the quarter, the Resource Center said that the number of breaches has already exceeded all of 2020 through the end of the third quarter by 17%. That's everything, all 4 quarters of 2020, 17% more through 9 months. So it's kind of scary. So that frequency, the impact and issues and implications of these incidences and the number that's occurring is what's driving the insurance industry to increase premiums, decrease coverages or limits that they offer. They're making requirements to obtain or retain insurance more difficult. And we're seeing non-renewal policies because the business may fail today's underwriting versus when they first took on the policy. That tells you the insurance industry is losing money on cyber insurance. So one of the things you have to look at is not only is it more difficult and more expensive because more, businesses have more risks and exposures today from cyber, it's that you just can't take a willy-nilly approach to cybersecurity anymore. You need to be proactive and intentional when it comes to providing security to your firm. So, and like I said, meeting the insurance requirements, your first, the first presentation that we went through, if you're not doing most or all of those things, like your 5-6 critical things like multi-factor, checking, with regards to, emails, your, remote access to systems, things like that. If you're not doing that, insurance companies will not write your insurance, or they will charge you significantly higher premiums and probably even put limitations on how much they want to offer for things like ransomware. So it's something so that understanding from, session one is the minimum you almost have to do nowadays to get good cyber insurance programs out there. So some of the things you can do is you could literally look at the applications you get and say, if you intuitively look at it and say, I should be able to answer yes, but right now it's a no, I might need somebody to help me get to a yes so that I don't have a problem. So we're working with most of our clients months and months before their next cyber insurance renewal to understand where the market's going and what they may have to have in place so they're not scrambling. And the sad part is not everybody's systems are capable of making the changes. It may be a software. If you have to put in, I think you guys mentioned like Duo or something like that to allow them to use multi-factor on certain programs, it may crash their primary software. So they may have to find a different workaround, or we have to find different coverage with different limits. And you also have to understand, insurance companies are also hiring these third-party vulnerability scannings, and these are not what I know you Bit by Bit does, where you're really doing intentional testing of systems. This is low-hanging fruit. They're just doing quick searches to see if you have ports open on like web email servers or websites, and is your patching up to date, things that they can quickly determine that this low-hanging fruit, if you're not doing at least this easy stuff, you're probably not doing the other things that need to be done. And insurance companies, we had a client recently that for the most recent renewal, the insurance company did a scan of their various entities, and one of their locations did not meet requirement. And they basically gave them about 45 days to correct their shortcomings, so to speak, or they will not get a renewal offer. So that's taking that first one to the second. Post breach, we talked about when you turn in the claim, that the insurance company will help you go through that. They're going to assign a cyber breach coach like John, an attorney, to help you deal with and prepare for the litigation that may come down the road in case you get sued. They're going to help you get the cyber forensics firms identify who and what occurred with regards to the data, and then ultimately help you notify everybody that needs to be breached. They're going to help you restore and pay for those data systems. And more importantly, if the policy is written correctly, would help you protect your cash flow, your bottom line from an insurance standpoint. So let's dig into the policies, so to speak. We mentioned in the second one, there's duties as an insured. The thing I cannot stress enough is you need to file the claim immediately, even before you call your own IT firm, because there are policies that may contain language that they have to approve everything you do for them to pay for it. So if you call your an IT firm, they start trying to do something and try to do this, and they send you a bill for $20,000 or $30,000, and you turn into the insurance company for the work that they did, the insurance company would be within their rights for those policies to say, sorry, we're not going to pay for that. We've seen situations where businesses did not follow that, and they restored their systems and sent a bill to the insurance company for like $80,000 when the ransomware was $5,000 demand. The insurance company says, we would have just paid the $5,000 and cleaned your system rather than wiping it clean and buying new stuff, new software, new hardware. No, we're not going to pay. The second thing you also have to understand is there are so many coverages that can be within a cyber insurance policy. There are programs out there that may only have 4 or 5 potential triggers of what's covered, and you have others that may have 30 types of coverage. And more importantly, when you look at a policy, you see all these various limits. Those are not limits for each coverage. Those are sub-limits to your policy's, aggregate. And that aggregate is all incidences during the course of a year. That's the most they're going to pay off your policy. So you can quickly, and we've seen clients that unfortunately, even with $1 million limits, blew through their $1 million. So that's why towards the end, we'll talk about how much coverage you need to have. So with that, you have to look at your first party, protecting yourself for the things that you need to insure for. You're going to be looking at, some of my insurance companies may call it network and information security liability. Some might call it first party defense or just liability. Each insurance company has their own language, so you have to analyze, do they have these components inside their program? Will they have breach response to help you, send out notification to those that need done? Or if you fail to do the proper privacy notification. Do they provide coverage for crisis management or public relations? I always like to use the analysis of cheat-sheets versus sheets. Back when, I think it was like 2000, late 2000, when there was the tomatoes and celery contained, I can't think of the hepatitis, and people unfortunately died. Chi-Chi's did not do good PR, and they're out of business. National chain of restaurants. Sheets had the same issues. They took a proactive approach, and they're doing quite well. So you need to protect your customers through. You may have to pay ransomware or extortion. Ransomware is when somebody is holding your data hostage. Extortion is saying, okay, if you don't pay us, we're going to release your data. They stole your data. Some insurance companies combine those, some have separate limits. So if it's strictly ransomware, you may have higher limits to pay the damages, but if it's extortion, they may have a smaller limit because that's more likely to happen. So, and that's where you have to pay attention to. Then you have your data loss. Do they provide coverage for you to hopefully try to either recreate or restore that data because you may not have viable backups? Then there's repairing your system, or more importantly, replacing, or as a term, bricking. Your computer literally is a good paperweight now because it's no longer usable because when they go to restore the system, whether it be, wiping the BIOS, reinstalling the software, what they need to do today won't allow the computer system to take the new updates, in which case you literally have to, toss the computer and go buy a new one. Then there's some provide coverage for improving your security after the event occurs. So let's say Brett's team comes in and sees this is how the event occurred, this is how they got through your system, but you now need to spend $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 or more to improve your system so that it doesn't occur again. that can also be picked up by a cyber policy. And like I said, each insurance company has their own language. So you want to look to see if they have these kinds of coverages. And we'll, much like Bit by Bit provided a cheat sheet for everybody to review, we will provide a cheat sheet for everybody as to the types of coverages and things that they can look out there. But as talking to John and Brett, it seems like every time we see one trend, then there's a whole new trend that may or may not be covered, and it takes insurance companies a while to respond. Like, for example, we had the very first phishing or social engineering or fraudulent impersonation, depending upon your insurance company, that we saw was back in the early 2000s. Before cyber insurance really just was starting to come into its infancy. Now we've seen that where they were covering if you inadvertently paid the wrong party, but there was no coverage if another party didn't pay you properly because they paid somebody else. And now you're out going, where's our money, or things like that. So then we talked what John went into about the potential liabilities. We're going to have to pay for the forensics, cyber forensics, to figure out who, what, where, why, and how this all occurred, who was affected, what data, who do we have to send the notifications out to, all of that. And I've seen bills from anywhere from $40,000 to over $100,000 just to figure that out, because even with the technology that I know can be used, it's still a monumental task to check the entire system. Is that a pretty much of a fair statement there, Brett?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, each case kind of ranges. You know, a lot of them will start maybe a few $1,000s if it's an email account, and if the bad actor really didn't do a whole lot there, to certainly, yeah, tens of thousands to six figures. You know, when you start seeing really bad ones, I mean, I've seen, you know, even higher than that in, you know, really large enterprises that, you know, have had massive hacks. But it gets kind of expensive quickly because of the amount of time and effort that's put into that. So you start adding up forensics and legal and all of these things, your bill is going to climb, very fast.
Yeah, and then depending upon you know, the cost to defend you, get you set up to be prepared whether you get sued with papers or not, I mean served with papers or not, you have to have, you know, legal counsel. That defense comes out of your limit, in addition to potentially any damages that you may have to pay. And that is where you may have third-party defense, third-party liability. It could also be network and information security liability. The same thing for first party. You have to look at, do your policies have coverage for each of these things that we go through? And I know John was talking about preparing. He's the good guy helping you to prepare for that potential down the road. We talked about crisis management, public relations. You know, they both have a function. One is to deal with the imminent issue and help correct the situation and get a resolution, get it fixed, get you back in business, and as well as public relations, which is somewhat of a keep your customers to some extent, or future customers. You know, they may need to engage with call centers to take the calls that are coming in from your customers. Hey, this is what happened, whatever, I got this problem, and deal with, you know, setting them up with identity theft coverage or whatever might happen. Because I don't know if, you know, your staff is going, as a business, your staff is going to want or be capable of appropriately dealing with customers that call that have a problem because of a breach that may have occurred. We talked about the notification and credit monitoring. Those are things. Now we talked about, like with one of our clients that barely made the cutoff from a regulatory standpoint. you may be investigated by various government entities or states, and there's going to be costs associated with that. You could be fined. And those are some of the things that need to be covered by your policy. If you deal with credit cards, the credit card industry may fine you. And some of these fines we've seen are $5, $10, $20, $30,000 a month for when you're not in compliance. And guess what? They don't know you're out of compliance until the event occurs. And then they kind of figure out what went wrong and how long it occurred and send you a fine. And the very interesting one that we're seeing, intellectual and media liability coverage. We had a client recently served with papers for their marketing person used a photo that they got from what they thought was a royalty-free site, but they were served with a paper for $150,000 copyright infringement because the photo actually came from a national magazine and the photographer was suing. You know, they're now mounting a defense. One of the defenses, the photo is on a royalty-free website, but you know, whether or not somebody put it there or maybe the photographer put it there, I don't know, but we are now defending our client under the cyber coverage for something from one of their marketing. You know, we've also seen things from websites not complying with Americans with Disabilities Act and things like that that you have to look at. Any other things that you guys can think of from a third-party liability that they should be looking at from a coverage standpoint that may need to get paid?
Not so much categories of areas to be paid, but I would just note on the legal counsel and even the forensic firm, the policies we'll have listed. I think it makes sense if you're an insured to just check in the backgrounds of the firms listed by the carrier.
Oh, good point.
For example, you might have a relationship with a law firm or a forensics firm that can help you. And if they're not listed there, you might have trouble getting their help if a policy claim is triggered. And typically, and David can speak to this, you can work with your broker to get those kind of firms added. I would just double check the credentials, take a look at their website if they're unfamiliar to you. If you have folks that work in that space, those two spaces, to talk to your broker about getting them added to your policy. Because if something happens, you go tender a claim and want to use your relationship you have with your existing provider, the carrier might not allow it.
Yeah, good point. Now, I will tell you, typically they do not like to use the same IT firm. We talked about that in the what occurs when it happens, because sometimes some IT firms that do the daily service of your system may not have your system up to date. But if you're using a cybersecurity firm, things like that, we negotiate that with the insurance company before we place the policy so that they can keep that relationship going. You know, whoever that might be from a legal or investigative standpoint. Then we can shift. So we've done first party and third party. First party is you, third party is everybody else. Next is what also can happen to you. It's crime. Now, once again, different terminology for different insurance companies. It might be computer fraud. It might be cyber crime. It might be fund transfer fraud. It's when somebody manipulates a computer system to steal money, whether they get your user ID and password to your payroll account, change all your employees' records so that they have an extra bank account. And then at some point between pays, they switch all the payroll to be going to a third party. It could be they getting into your bank accounts and stealing or transferring money out of your bank accounts. That's somebody manipulating a computer system. Then you have the situation where they dupe you. They manipulate a person into doing something. And once again, different terminology: fraudulent impersonation, cyber deception, phishing, social engineering. Now, when you look at coverage-wise, for being duped, typically insurance companies don't like to offer more than $50,000 or $100,000 of coverage, or maybe $250,000. And some may have requirements that if how you pay somebody changes, you have to have documentation as to how did you verify, who did you verify with, when did you verify that it was correct. So in other words, you picked up the phone, you called from your phone database, not the email that you received, and you called the person you know and says, did you change your bank account? And if you don't do that, they won't pay the claim. What's interesting though, is if you do that, more likely you're not going to have a claim. So that's kind of the catch-22, but that's actually in some policies. Then you have reverse. One of the first ones we had years ago was one of our municipalities. The tax collection, regional tax collection, got duped into changing the bank account for one of our municipalities, and they did not receive their normal tax distributions that they receive from all the earned income tax. We've seen clients that have got their email systems hacked because they did not have multi-factor. And after they sent out the invoices, the perpetrator sent out another email that says, hey, by the way, we're no longer taking checks, or we're no longer taking payment by this means. Please pay us by this EFT. And it wasn't until, quite a while later that one of their clients called and said, hey, did you change this? And when they said, what are you talking about? They said, well, we got an email from you. And they're like, no, you didn't. And they said, yes, we did. And they went through nothing on the desktop. When you guys dug into their server, their email server, you saw that somebody was in their server and actually had set up rules relating to the emails and things like that. So like, if you delete an email from your phone, it's deleted off your desktop. And if you move it to a folder, you don't see it on your phone or your desktop. And that's what they were basically doing. It was kind of interesting. So that's reverse phishing, smishing, invoice manipulation. The more intriguing, we've had an incident already with crypto jacking. I don't know if people heard, people are buying computers and having banks of computers to basically run the calculations to verify Bitcoin transactions. And if you're the first one that verifies it, you get a reward. So they call it, bit mining. So, and if you go back probably a decade or two ago, SETI, the search for extraterrestrial life, NASA put out a thing where you can put a program in your computer and you would receive data from the various radio telescopes, and it would run in your computer when you weren't using it. And they actually had a reward if somebody found proof that there was extraterrestrial or distant communication. So I don't know how many thousands or millions of people did that, but that's the same process. They're running their program in your system. And when the processing requirements go up, so do the power requirements. So your system is going to slow down and your utility bills are going to go up. That's something that it can actually occur. And then you get into the thing that most risk managers are concerned about is the loss of income, the company's cash flow, because cash flow is king. If you don't have appropriate cash levels coming into your business, things are not going to go well for you. So business income is important. But so is, I'm going to jump to contingent business income. Okay, we talked about all these businesses that have things in the cloud or they're using third party. We use a third party agency management system. So business income coverage is if our systems are affected. Contingent business income is the services that we require from a third party are affected. So if our agency management system goes down, that could have an impact on us. So we have contingent business income coverage. So those are the things you have to look at and goes back to where's your data and how do you map your data mapping that you mentioned in the first meeting. If you don't know where it's at, how do you know what you need to insure yourself for? We talked about public relations, loss of customers, trying to mitigate that. The other interesting thing is you may need to shut your system down, even though it's working, to prevent future damage or more damage from spreading. Some of the policies don't cover voluntarily shutting down your computer system when it comes to business income. So you have to look at it to see if it does. Because, I mean, obviously you don't want the virus or the ransomware continuing to spread, so you shut down your entire system and start cleaning it out. You have to look for that. But if you haven't gotten the gist so far, there is no such thing as apples to apples when it comes to cyber. You have to read your policies. And more importantly, ask for sample policies when you're looking at it, because you want to know what are the terms and conditions of your policy. What are your requirements if you have a loss? What are your, what do you have to do? What is covered? What is not covered? And it does vary from insurance company to insurance company. So they may use similar names of coverage or different names of coverage, but they can have completely different definitions as to the coverage. We talked about social engineering, fraudulent impersonation. You may have a requirement that you have to verify or you have no coverage, where others you don't have to verify. Or some might say, if the transaction is less than X, let's say $50,000, you don't have to verify, but if it's over 50, you may have to verify that kind of change. You have to read your policies to know what's going on. Anything else from that you guys may have seen from dealing with the various insurance companies out there that may have surprised you?
I think you really hit him, David. I mean, and what John mentioned there, just, you've got to know what's in your policy. You have to know what's expected of you, when to call, who to call, who can be on your short list of help, what the expectations are on the front end. You touched, a few slides ago about some of the kind of early scanning and sort of assessments, if you will, that, insurance is undertaking, and kind of using that as your grade, if you will. Mm-hmm. All of those things are things that anybody out on the internet could do. So it isn't like, this insurance is, getting inside your network or doing anything, that just any bad actor who's effectively scanning the world every day isn't already doing. And so that's why I think you mentioned it's such a low-hanging fruit and just the baseline of what to consider. So it's a lot to take in, but fortunately, again, there's a lot of guidance there from insurance, from the industry kind of vendor neutral security frameworks out there where you can go about this in a stepwise fashion and make progress. Even if you feel like you're way behind on all of these things, doing something today and making progress is going to put you in a better position for that. Kind of maybe it's a multi-year plan to get there, but ultimately that's what you might have to do to get coverage or get the right coverage at the end of the day.
Yeah, and so and like I said, because of all this, it's best to start well before the policy renews to know what are the new requirements that we may need to meet. If you do have the coverage now, what do we need to meet for the renewal? Because you may need time to address these things. Bring somebody in to test your systems and figure out what might need to be fixed. Just a reminder, everybody, if you do have questions, don't forget to put them into the chat box, because we'll be coming up to the question section here shortly. So this is the one that I think becomes very vague for everybody, very difficult to understand, because if you have not gone through a colonial pipeline that's $3 or $5 million ransomware demand, who, by the way, I did talk to that attorney. He's friends with one of our clients that, but, you know, everybody thinks, once again, this is, you know, a ransomware is for big employers. No, we've had a manufacturer here that has about 150-ish, 160-ish employees that had a $2 million initial ransom demand that was negotiated down to like 800,000. So and you know, it might be a company that has, you know, 30 million of revenue. So that's a big chunk of money. And even negotiating it down, you know, they got caught because their system requirements were not strong enough that they only were given $500,000 of ransomware coverage. So that rest of it came out of their pocket. So that's something you have to look at, is how much coverage do you need? We talked about that big bucket. They have a total aggregate limit. So, you know, if you have personal identifiable information, that could be customers, that could be employees. I mean, at $250,000 to $300,000 per $250 to $300 per person, if you have 1,000 employees, let's say 1,000 identifiable information from customers, that's $250,000 to $300,000. Just doing quick math. It's $25,000 to $30,000 if you have 100. You know, I have some clients that may have currently, you know, 50 to 100 employees, but over a lifetime in their system, you know, they may have hundreds that you have to look at.
Going to jump in there, David, and we've responded to incidents where we've asked the client about sort of the setup of their information, right? You know, where, you know, from a geographic standpoint, are there clients or customers? What type of data did they store about them? And they had a pretty good idea of what they thought they had, but by the time we went through investigating it and following kind of the trail, so to speak, of the incident, I think they were shocked to find that they had data for people that they didn't know about in their systems from states that they didn't anticipate. And that ballooned their notification costs because the legal team has to address each one of those basically at state by state level. And, you know, the customer, I forget the exact numbers, but they thought they, you know, might have had data from like 6 different states and they had it from almost 30. So, you know, it's when you start talking per record and, you know, there's costs and things, they can balloon up pretty quickly.
Yeah. We talked about cyber forensics costs potentially being significant, fines from the credit card industry. Then you have we talked about your loss of customers, loss of sales and profit, cost to the damage to your systems, having to repair, replace computer systems, restore data, the actual ransomware extortion event that could be sizable. We have not seen one under $25,000 this year. There are so many events that these perpetrators, I mean, they got so many opportunities. They get down there and they start right out of the gate with something, and they will do once the program is running in your system, they know it. They will look up your company. They will figure out who you are, and you could do a Google search on yourself. And a lot of times you could see, if you type in my business annual revenue, it may pop up. So they're guessing if your revenue is $2 million, they think, hey, you know, I could probably get $200,000 or $300,000 out of them. So they're going to demand probably a little bit more than that, figuring from a negotiation, you know, they might be able to get that $100,000, $200,000 off you. So don't think that, and we talked about in the second set, a lot of times they're going to damage your backups. So you may not have viable backups. You may have no choice but to pay the ransom. And then we get into, you need John to come in and help defend you and pay lawsuits. So, you know, $1 million sounds like a lot of money, but until you do that analysis, the identification analysis, and figure out what do you have, where do you have it, and what the potential implications are, how do you know how much coverage you really need to have when you go to buy the coverage? 1 million may not be enough for a lot of businesses. And even, small businesses, that might not be enough. So just a couple other little things that you should know. There are policies out there for individual identity theft. I know we have quite a number of clients that use Identity Shield, including ourselves. It's like a cafeteria plan. The employer can pay for it. The employee can pay for it. And it is available, and it's pretty cost effective from an employee standpoint. I know quite a number of our benefit clients do that. But then on the other hand, you can do as an individual, you could do LifeLock, who spend so much money on advertising. It's not cheap to have something like that. And the insurance industry is evolving. Personal cyber coverage is now starting to become available with homeowners policies, to cover liability issues, damage to your computer, and crime issues. So, if you have a homeowner or renter's policy, have a conversation with your personal insurance agent to look at insurance for you on an individual basis as well. So with that, we've come to the end with about roughly 8 minutes to spare for questions. If any, let me see. Trying to get my chat box to open again. Here we go. Okay, I think we answered this one. How much coverage do you think we're going to need? Or how to determine how much coverage we need? Any other questions that somebody may have? John and Brett, anything else that you could think of for the good of the group that maybe we did not touch on relating to your experience dealing with the insurance industry?
Pretty complete, David. I think it just maybe to iterate the crossover between the legal and the technical concepts, to keep that in mind, and to make sure when you are having a policy proposal in front of you that you think through what is covered and what isn't covered and the limits within each bucket. It's really the sort of takeaways from my perspective with my legal hat on. Okay.
Oh, Brett, anything there? Yeah, I would just add that, it's a lot to kind of take in at once. Obviously, I think all of us are here to answer questions, offline, and just try to get people going in the right direction.
Actually, I just read something the other day and I forgot to put it in here. In one of our insurance magazines, it was referenced that some of the data that was taken from an employer came from the employee benefits files. Well, and the investigation relating to their risk compliance and the benefit side, that's actually a fiduciary liability issue. So some of that liability may actually fall to their fiduciary liability policy versus just their cyber policy. So when something occurs, it's not unusual for us to see multiple insurance policy types involved. From, general liability wouldn't cover cyber, but fiduciary could step in if it's relating to employee benefits. To, from a liability standpoint, we see somebody, something goes wrong at a job site, and they also get sued for breach of contract, and that might be something picked up by directors and officers. So when something occurs, you have to look at multiple policies. You may have a incident that occurs that damages your computer. Your property policy may have some limited coverage or some coverage for your computer systems from damage due to a virus. So you may be able to actually get some coverage for repairing or, replacing your computer system from your property policy too. So that's why it's important to, dig in and review your coverages with your agent, especially when you have a claim. Not only turn in directly to the insurance company, but make sure you talk to your agent quickly so that we can look at, are there other policies that may apply to help you out? And with that, if any, John Michael, anything else that you can see on your end from a, any other questions come over from any other source?
I don't see anything, David. And just as a reminder, this was recorded and will be sent out to everybody, post webinar. So be on the lookout for that probably either at the end of this week or next week.
Excellent. Then, like I said, we will put together a cheat sheet of coverage terminology for everybody to look for when they're reviewing, what does their policy cover themselves for. So on behalf of the Duncan Financial Group, and on behalf of John and Brett from Bit by Bit, we appreciate you attending our webinar series, and do not hesitate to reach out to us should you have questions, should you have needs, because this is, in our 3 sessions, is a lot of information to take in, and we'd be happy to walk you through anything that you may have questions on. And with that,
thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And we will bring this to a close.